For the longest time, Battlefield had always been a PC-oriented game. The original Battlefield titles were developed with PC primarily in mind, but there would be a game that would change all of that. A game that may have been the first domino to fall that really set in motion the overwhelming success that Battlefield would eventually see in the future. It was also personally my first ever Battlefield game that I had ever played, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that either. This is the Battlefield Bad Company series, and it would actually get a sequel in Bad Company 2. But strangely, after this point, it would get no further entries despite its pretty incredible success. Why though, exactly? Well, we'll investigate that throughout this video, and I would make the argument that Bad Company as a series was probably the most influential game on the overall direction and advancements that DICE and EA would make in the following entries to come. But there really is something iconic and unique at the bottom of this series, and we're going to investigate what made Battlefield Bad Company stand out and truly very special. On June 23, 2008, EA would release Battlefield Bad Company, the first ever Battlefield game to be fully developed also with consoles in mind and contain a fully fledged single-player story. This was pretty significant because as console gaming was becoming massively popular in the early to mid-2000s, games like Halo, Call of Duty, and others were offering campaigns in their games along with usually a multiplayer component to take advantage of the growing space of online console gaming. But despite multiplayer clearly being the bread and butter of Battlefield and DICE's strong suit, they didn't skip out on making a campaign for this. Now, recently, I had been pretty critical of the Battlefield 6 campaign. I mean, I really didn't care for it for a lot of reasons, and a lot of people in my comments of that video were like, well, honestly, Battlefield has never had particularly great campaigns, and I was thinking about that a little bit, and I'm like, well, I very much remember Bad Company and Bad Company 2 fondly in that aspect, so I wanted to go back and actually look at them in a new light because it had been a long time since I'd played these, but I had such fond memories of them and I really wanted to see if that still holds up. I started by playing Bad Company 1's campaign, and right away from the main menu, I had remembered why this game just at least felt so charming. The main menu music is lighthearted from the start. Now, interestingly though, that isn't always the case because as you complete more campaign missions and progress through the game, the music actually changes depending on where you are in the story, which is a really thoughtful touch, but it starts out very, playful and welcoming. It's kind of insane to think about the difference. When you're done with the Battlefield 6 campaign on PC, the game literally prompts you and asks you if you're ready to uninstall it now, like immediately. It feels like they're begging you to get rid of it or something. And yes, it's for storage reasons, but when it comes to having a game that you're proud of and you want people to experience, it just isn't a good look when as soon as you're done with it, they want you to eviscerate it as soon as possible from your hard drive. Bad Company, on the other hand, took the time to make the single player as engaging as they could because they understood that even though most Battlefield fans play for multiplayer, campaign is an undeniable large part of its identity overall. And what I love about Bad Company's campaign is just how unserious all of it is.
Hey, how you doing? You smell very clean.
Battlefield 6's story and even 2042's limited seasonal storytelling was just far too dramatic for what I felt was appropriate and doable. It just didn't come off very compelling. Bad Company was extremely refreshing to me in this way because it wasn't taking itself seriously whatsoever. And honestly, despite its age, I still found it to be genuinely pretty funny. Now, sure, humor from a PS3 era 2008 video game, might not totally land or be as sharp in 2026, but I think it gets away with being goofy as more of a product of its time. Instead of being some really serious and dramatic war drama about countries and factions and personal betrayals and stuff like that, this game is about four men in Bad Company, which are basically the troublemakers that the army doesn't want and are essentially disposable fodder and are treated as such. You play as Preston Marlowe under Sergeant Redford with Sweetwater and Haggard alongside you. It's a much more focused character-based experience where they really have to rely on the dialogue and personal banter to sell it. It's a perfect squad dynamic for humor. Preston is mostly the stand-in for you, the player, to project yourself onto. Sweetwater is a technically savvy-minded guy with a thing for the female commander who he's always trying to flirt with and, striking out with.
I'll get back to you with further orders. Out.
Oh, she's got a real nice voice. Sweetwater.
Haggard is the southern meathead guy that likes to blow stuff up and really likes the Dallas Cowboys. And poor Redford, man is literally always one day away from retirement until he gets dragged back into some shit with these guys again.
Well, we're going in before them. They're too expensive to waste.
Yeah, that makes sense. Weren't you supposed to be shipping home about now, Sarge?
Tomorrow, Haggard. One more day of this shit, and the only thing I'm going to be fighting a blue mark.
Yeah, I hear you, Sarge. Next up, the Caribbean.
Well, after Zabelgrad.
They just make for a ridiculously entertaining and humorous, funny group dynamic for the whole game, and the actual plot is just as unserious as the characters. It's not some big end-of-the-world, verge of World War III kind of high-stakes story. It's just about their shenanigans and adventures hunting for gold.
Damn smoke. You haven't gone and hurt yourself, have you? If they ship you home as well, I'll be alone with the new guy. Come here, take a look at this. He's not Russian?
Nope. We got ourselves a mercenary. One of the Legionnaires, no less.
Whoa, the Legionnaire. I thought that was just a spook story.
Nah, he's real. Got his own damn army. Some say the deadliest in the world. Now look at this. Acta non verba. That's the Legionnaire's motto. It's Latin, and it means action, not words.
Hang on, I was at the Taco Emporium. I think you'll find that Spanish.
Oh, just shut up. Your motto should be verba non acta, because you never shut the hell up. Let's get out of here.
You should listen, Sarge. Knowledge is power. For example, rumor says he always pays in gold bars.
I'll just check for a pulse in his pockets. Well, slap me hard and call me El Dorado.
Okay, El Dorado, let's have a look.
Whoa, finders keepers, that's the rule.
So, that's how it started. We found this little piece of gold. To people with less moral fiber, that might have posed a problem. But we're all men of duty. So, when the sergeant said the gold belonged to the army, we all agreed and got back to work.
Now, there are some twists and turns throughout, and you do have like the backdrop of an actual war going on behind the scenes, but mostly it's about being troublemakers, discovering this paramilitary group who's also going after some gold, and then, you have like comedic overweight dictators with golden helicopters.
So there we were, crammed in a pimped out Russian hind with a megalomaniac and a rack full of bad CDs.
Between Sweetwater always striking out with Juliet and Redford never being able to retire, it's just silly. And we'll come back around to the story in a moment, but what about the gameplay? Honestly, when I came back to it, the gameplay is probably the most poorly aged aspect of Bad Company 1, and that'll become more apparent later on. But Bad Company was really still trying to work out the kinks of console gameplay and particularly making it feel right on a controller. Despite the Frostbite engine being very technically impressive, especially for the PlayStation 3 generation hardware, the destruction is great. It's remarkable, but it does have a few odd quirks. Like, most walls don't have any bullet penetration. Even a lot of thin materials like wood or trees or just other thin things that you think wouldn't stop bullets dead in their tracks, but they do. You could blow up most buildings you encounter to reach more difficult enemies, and the destruction capabilities overall are solid, but the gunplay was still a little bit more cumbersome and not the smooth, sleek, and snappy feel that we all know Battlefield for now. Also, not to mention, but this was still the mid to late 2000s where most FPS games had manual healing. This was pretty standard practice. I mean, most games had like a health pack system or something until Call of Duty popularized regenerative healing. Bad Company 1 does have manual healing in form of the Life 2 injector that are basically just equipment with an automatic cooldown. In a way, this is essentially regenerative healing with an extra step. The level design of the game is fairly basic and simple. Most missions are centered around a few geographical locations, typically going from point A to B, clearing out camps of enemies along the way. Now, every single weapon you pick up is a recorded collectible. Some weapons are mission specific and also have different rarities. Plus, you can grab gold bars in the maps optionally for the completion trophies, essentially working like intel drops in Call of Duty campaigns. Now, by today's standards, yeah, the gameplay is pretty basic, but the destruction, the open-ended sandbox sandbox nature of the levels and all of the different unique weapons and equipment and vehicles to play around with made for just very straightforward fun. Like, in what war game can you actually just casually drive around a golf cart around a course with your full squad stack in the back? Now, granted, one of the pain points in hindsight was the vehicle controls of this one. Bad Company 1, I think, specifically had extremely clunky and floaty feeling vehicles that would be markedly improved in future games. You got to pilot everything from trucks to golf carts to tanks and even helicopters. The variety of different vehicles you can control was almost just as plentiful as the actual in-game weapons, which is impressive for this game. The entire time you get to use all this fun stuff while the Bad Company banters and tries to go behind the back of the US military and mercenaries to retrieve this gold. Now, near the end of the game, we see the gold helicopter dictator guy wasn't the main villain, rather a different man named Legionnaire who we actually defeat at the end of the game by shooting down his helicopter, only for them to show that he is still alive. We have this like cut in at the end and clearly wants revenge in some kind of sequel. And Bad Company 2 would come out, being a direct sequel to this game. Kind of, but Legionnaire is completely dropped in the second game. No mention or appearance at all. Yeah, the story is goofy and very unserious, but in a lot of ways, that's what I found so charming and appealing. But I do think that it is kind of strange to set up plot points and, actual characters that just literally disappear in a direct sequel of that game. It's strange. However, this game with the tone and humor and unserious plot would change pretty dramatically in the next title. But before we get there, though, it is worth talking about Bad Company's multiplayer. The X factor for Battlefield, the element that really made them stand out, was obviously the large-scale multiplayer conflicts that they could pull off, and Bad Company would also focus in on that, but initially it only launched with just one game mode. Now, other ones would be added eventually down the road as per the community's wishes, but in keeping in the theme of the campaign, Gold Rush was the multiplayer mode. It was a fun, 24-player game where teams try to capture different stashes of gold from the enemy team, and the more you capture, the more reinforcements you get, and this was some of my first ever experience with online gaming, and because I was so young, I really wasn't able to articulate at the time what I liked or disliked about this multiplayer, but to make matters worse, you pretty much can't play the vanilla experience of Bad Company's multiplayer anymore at all, as EA would permanently shut down the servers for good in 2023. There are some community-hosted servers occasionally that you can play, but by and large, the vanilla experience of back in the day and primarily on console has just been lost to time. It's unsurprising, really, seeing as the game is nearing its 20-year age mark, but still unfortunate for those who really loved the MP experience. But this by no means was the end, as only 2 years later, DICE would release the sequel to Bad Company.
It's a fake, what you found.
Fake, sir?
A dummy. We think it's a dry run.
Nothing's ever really that simple, though.
Even though I would play Bad Company off and on back then, it wouldn't be until Bad Company 2 that really got me invested in the series. In a way, Battlefield Bad Company 2 is a true sequel and a successor and advancement to the prior game, but in other ways, it also could not be more different as well. And this is made strikingly clear right away, as instead of being a humorous, lighthearted start to the game, Bad Company 2 opens with a very serious and strange, ominous tone and very dark subject matter. It opens in a playable mission infiltrating a Japanese island in World War II to extract a defector to get intel on a secret weapon. Very tonally different to the original Bad Company game, and if you didn't know any better, just the end of Bad Company 1 and the start of Bad Company 2, you'd have no idea that these are related. But this makes for a really tense experience, this first level, with no HUD, amazing visuals, great audio for the time, and definitely a massive step up from Bad Company 1 from a technical perspective. And despite the rest of the game not taking place in World War II, they made all of these assets, weapons, and characters just for this level. It's truly an amazing appetizer for the rest of the game, and such a unique start that at first seems really out of place and disconnected from the rest of the story, but does indeed have a payoff later. The difference in theme and tone, however, continues into the rest of the game, as when we catch up with our squad, the same 4 from the original game, the vibe is a lot more serious. No, yeah, they still do joke around quite a bit and are much more humorous than, say, any other Battlefield campaign by a long shot, but compared to Bad Company 1, the lighthearted nature is mostly gone. Sweetwater isn't trying to just hit on Juliet anymore, and Sargent seems a bit more jaded this time around. I mean, granted, I probably would too if my retirement got canceled that many times, but the whole plot and events of the prior game aren't even really talked about or acknowledged. The entire, chasing gold and Legionnaire subplot, it's like it never happened in Bad Company 2. The plot of this game is much more standard Battlefield stuff, with pursuing targets, paramilitary groups controlled by shadow entities, betrayals, secret weapons, and a lot of stuff like that. But the four main characters do still serve as nice humor counterbalances to the more serious subject matter even so. While I definitely feel they toned down the humor a lot in Bad Company 2, I still found myself chuckling at quite a lot of the dialogue.
Here's something I'm wondering. Who the hell goes to war in cowboy hats?
Cowboys?
Cowboys haven't been in a war for over 100 years.
Dallas Cowboys go to war every Sunday. Sometimes Monday.
Let's just find Aguirre, okay?
And while the overall plot is fine and not quite as fun as gold hunting charades, it's actually the gameplay that sees the biggest improvements. First off, the visual fidelity is already, remarkably better despite being on the same Frostbite engine and same generation of hardware. The controls and gunplay feel great in comparison to Bad Company 1. And also, not to mention, regenerative healing finally makes an appearance, getting rid of that life injection mechanic. The destruction was also taken up a notch. Environments feel more alive than they ever did before, and the weapon selection is pretty impressive for a game on this hardware. Also, I loved how in missions, every so often you could find a supply airdrop and then pick your loadout of guns that you want to use. Every collectible weapon that you would find, similar to the prior game, gets added to this list, but now you can pick them up at your leisure, and this helps, you spend more time playing with your favorite weapons and then picking what's right for the job ahead. Also, another interesting thing to point out is that in Bad Company 1, most missions took place in a pretty similar geographical area. Like, a lot of the environments just look the same throughout the entire game. Bad Company 2, however, is all over the place with globetrotting, which was definitely influenced by Call of Duty's campaigns, as that was the unique style of Modern Warfare games around that era. But it meant that Bad Company 2 had much more unique set pieces, great environments, and beautiful play spaces. But it also made for much more complex and interesting level design as well. For example, one of my favorite missions is it's that one where the snowstorm rolls in and then you, or Preston, get separated from your group, but you have to make your way down the mountain without freezing to death by finding different shelters and fireplaces and even blowing up red barrels for fire in a pinch and taking out enemies at the same time. It's actually so good. Plus, this is also where you can see Battlefield's signature color scheme really start to come through on the minimap, the icons, and so on. It just looks very Battlefield. Remember when game sequels were actually massive improvements to the prior? Like, Bad Company 2 is leaps and bounds better from a technical and gameplay standpoint, that it makes the player experience that much more enjoyable. Bad Company 2 was just bigger and better. The levels were more interesting, the gunplay was way more polished. You could make the case that the more serious plot was necessary to help the improvements in the gameplay aspects to really take shape. In addition to the more serious story topics and tone the game is going for, those of you paying attention to details may have already noticed that Battlefield Bad Company 1 has a T rating, where Bad Company 2 has an M rating, and that's primarily because Bad Company 2 has a lot more blood in this, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the more serious tone the game is trying to captivate. In the story, there's a whole thing about a guy who has information on a secret weapon who's really being controlled by another Russian guy in the shadows. The Russian guy kills him, and the secret weapon is more or less an EMP that, World War II guys were trying to uncover in what would be that mission they would never return from in the beginning of the game. There are some neat twists and turns to the story for sure, but I honestly think that I felt Bad Company was at its best when it was just about troublemakers being themselves and preventing Sarge from retiring. The end of the game comes when the secret EMP weapon gets put on a plane bound for Texas, meant to knock out the US defenses so that Russia can invade, initiating World War III. In a mission also very clearly inspired by Mile High Club in COD 4, the squad boards a plane from underneath and then hijacks it to destroy and disable the secret weapon, and also to kill Kirilenko, the Russian bad guy. The ending cutscene has the four being brought back into the fold once again, as he says that the Russians are invading, but not through Texas like they thought, after stopping the plane, but through Alaska.
Gentlemen,
Sir,
at ease. You have the heartfelt thanks of the United States government. Now, I'm sorry as hell to say this, but I need you all to come with me.
but why, sir?
The Russians. They're invading.
Sir. No, they're not, sir. We just blew up that fucking ultimate weapon of theirs. P.S. Invasion canceled, sir.
Not here. They're coming in through Alaska.
Alaska?
There are times it sucks to be right.
This is clearly the setup to another sequel, an entire story and a game that was clearly left on the table. Yet Bad Company 3, despite this, or I guess any sequel for that matter of this subseries, would never be made. Knowing how Bad Company is, if there was another game, the story would probably have nothing to do with the events of the prior if the record still tracks. It's really a shame, but history shows DICE has a thing about leaving potential completed trilogies on the table. But I think it's also worth mentioning as well just how good Bad Company 2's multiplayer was as well. Once again, the original experience has pretty much been lost to time, as the servers for Bad Company 2 are also permanently offline. But there is a PC client called Project Rome you can play, which is a hosted Bad Company server with a smaller but dedicated player base. Bad Company 2 multiplayer was where I fell in love with Battlefield. It even had a Vietnam DLC for $15 with tons of new weapons, maps, and characters. It was a pretty generous amount of content for $15 even back in that day. Overall, Bad Company 2 I truly feel is the superior game to the first in almost every single way. The multiplayer is much better and more deep, the campaign is way improved from a gameplay standpoint, and while I do miss the more lighthearted humor and tone of the first game, Bad Company 2's characters are still so charming that I feel like it carries it either way. But on that note, you may be asking why there never was a Bad Company 3. Well, the answer to that is both honorable and kind of depressing, if you ask me. You see, DICE, years down the road, admitted in interviews that they were unsure about making a Bad Company 3 because they didn't really understand why people even liked it. They genuinely don't seem to know what it was, the secret that made people enjoy Bad Company, and thus were too scared to try to recreate it. Not to mention, the lead devs on Bad Company are long gone from Battlefield for the most part, so I think it would be foolish to try to catch lightning in a bottle again when they themselves have admitted that they don't even really understand why it worked. Now, as much as I'm personally sad there is no Bad Company 3, as I truly think this is some of the best Battlefield there is to experience despite its age, I think it's also kind of honorable to put their ego aside and not try to dig it up for, its legacy and profit. I'd rather them not do it at all than to try to half-ass it and not understand it and mess it all up and just really hurt the reputation of the series. Obviously, EA and DICE would go on to make more massively successful and great Battlefield games, but nothing quite like Bad Company in that particular style has ever been attempted, nor do I think they ever will. So much has changed since 2010, and I don't think you could just come out with Bad Company 3 like that. It's a series that was laid to rest honorably, and I actually can't believe I'm saying this, but I have a lot of respect for EA and DICE to not try to reboot it at any point just because it was popular and would probably sell very well off name alone. I really think the secret sauce to these games was, despite making a very technically impressive, competent, and well-crafted fun game, they never took themselves too seriously as game devs and as artists. They just made something groundbreaking, fun, and innovative all in one very stylish package.
And maybe, if you're lucky, you get out in one piece. But in the end, I guess it's really about the guys next to you.